The world thought it knew the truth. Prince Harry, the beloved royal rebel, was a devoted father to Archie Harrison. But what if everything we believed was a lie? What if the one person Harry trusted the most, the very child he held in his arms and promised to protect, was not biologically his? That question hung in the air like a storm cloud over London, and it all came crashing down in a quiet courtroom, in front of people who had no idea what was about to unfold. Imagine the scene. Cameras flashing, journalists murmuring, lawyers shuffling papers nervously. Harry sits there, his jaw clenched, eyes darting from one face to the next. His hands, normally steady, tremble slightly. The DNA results, the piece of evidence everyone believed would settle the matter once and for all, are about to be read. And then, in the silence that followed, a bombshell explodes. A truth so shocking that it will ripple through the royal family, the media, and every fan watching from across the globe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the story had seemed simple. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle welcomed Archie Harrison into the world, and life, as the public saw it, moved forward. But behind the palace walls, whispers of doubt had begun. Rumors that started as casual gossip in the media had grown into a murmur among insiders. Then, a private investigator, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, reported something that changed the game entirely. Documents, conversations, tiny inconsistencies that no one had noticed. And suddenly, the DNA test became more than just a scientific formality. It became the ultimate litmus test for truth, loyalty, and trust. But let's step back for a moment. This isn't just a story about numbers, charts, or lab results. This is about a man, a prince, whose entire life has been public property. A man who has fought battles for independence, fought to protect his wife, and fought to define his own path outside the rigid confines of royalty. And now, he faces the unimaginable, a test that could shatter not only his identity as a father, but also his sense of self. How do you fight a truth you don't want to accept? How do you react when science contradicts your deepest beliefs? The courtroom, of course, was tense. Observers whispered among themselves. Cameras tilted, capturing every subtle twitch, every shift in posture. Meghan's absence, deliberate or otherwise, added another layer of tension. The public was watching, the media was speculating, and Harry was staring at the document in front of him. The document that could unravel everything he had believed, everything he had fought for. And when the results were finally read aloud, the room seemed to freeze in time. Harry's reaction was immediate. His face flushed, a mix of disbelief and fury. Papers crumpled in his hands. He muttered under his breath. Legal advisors leaned in, trying to calm him, but it was no use. This was not a situation that could be negotiated with words. This was a blow to the heart, a personal earthquake. And the reaction did not stay contained. Cameras caught the flaring intensity in his eyes, the rapid movement of his hands, the barely restrained anger that threatened to burst out at any moment. Outside, the world was waiting. The press had been tipped off by an anonymous source, someone who claimed to know the truth, someone who wanted the public to see the unraveling in real time. Social media exploded within seconds. Hashtags trended. Commentators speculated. Everyone wanted to know, what would Harry do next? Would he accept the DNA results? Would he crumble under the weight of disbelief? Or would he rise, determined to fight what he believed to be a mistake, a misrepresentation, a betrayal? And yet, amid the chaos, one question dominated everything. What did this mean for Archie Harrison? The child who had captured the hearts of millions was suddenly at the center of the most explosive royal controversy in decades. Custody, identity, and family loyalty all collided in a single, fragile moment. And as the public watched, the weight of expectation pressed on every participant in the room. Every word mattered. Every reaction was scrutinized. Every decision could shift the balance of an entire dynasty. Harry's mind raced. He had been through storms before. Public scrutiny, media attacks, palace politics. He had navigated them all with a mixture of courage, defiance, and, at times, anger. But this was different. This cut deeper. This struck at the very foundation of his life. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. The truth was not just inconvenient. It was potentially catastrophic. And then, something unexpected happened. Something that would make headlines for months to come. Something that would divide the royal family, the press, and the public in ways no one could have anticipated. Harry did not quietly accept the results. He did not nod politely, shake hands, and walk out. He did something far more explosive, something far more human. And in doing so, he set in motion a chain of events that would challenge every assumption we had about loyalty, truth, and family. The whispers outside the courtroom grew louder. Legal advisors muttered behind closed doors. Palace aides exchanged worried glances. And for a moment, the world held its breath. What had Harry done? What could he possibly have done in that moment of disbelief and fury? And more importantly, what would come next? The answers, of course, were not simple. There were secrets yet to be revealed. Conversations that had taken place in private, messages that had never been seen by the public, and a web of intrigue that stretched from the palace to the media to the highest levels of legal authority. Each revelation, each whisper, each hidden document would add layers of complexity, tension, and drama to a story that already seemed impossible to comprehend. And here's the truth. What happened in that courtroom is only the beginning. The DNA results, the fury, the secrets, the whispers, they all set the stage for a drama that would unfold over months, perhaps years, with twists, betrayals, and revelations that no one could predict. The question is not just what Harry did in that moment, but what this means for the monarchy, for Archie, and for every person who has ever believed they knew the truth. So stay with us, because in the chapters to come, we will uncover every hidden detail, every private conversation, every leaked document that shows just how far this story goes, and how shocking the truth really is. We will see the palace's reaction, the public's response, and most importantly, Harry's fight against a reality he refuses to accept. And when we reach the end, you will understand why this isn't just another royal scandal. This is a moment that could change history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a man's entire life is under a microscope, when every heartbeat, every gesture, every word is being observed by the world? That's exactly what unfolded the moment Prince Harry stepped into the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, so heavy it seemed to press down on everyone present. The walls of the grand, historic room, which had once seen centuries of decorum and silent judgment, suddenly felt smaller, almost suffocating. Every seat was taken, every camera aimed, every whisper amplified, and all eyes were on him. Harry walked in with a measured stride, but the calm veneer was cracking. His mind raced through scenarios, arguments, counter-arguments, all the while trying to maintain composure. But this was no ordinary legal proceeding. This was personal. This was about the child he had cradled, protected, and loved. A child whose very identity was now being called into question. The DNA results, displayed in stark black and white terms, were meant to end the speculation. Yet here he was, unable to accept them. The judge, a stern figure accustomed to handling high-stakes cases, cleared his throat. Silence fell like a velvet curtain. A court clerk shuffled papers and began reading the results aloud. Every syllable seemed to stretch into eternity. The tension was palpable. The room felt as though it were on the edge of a precipice, waiting for someone to tip it into chaos. And chaos came. Harry's first reaction was subtle, almost imperceptible to those who weren't watching closely. His hands tightened into fists, knuckles white. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. The murmur of the court faded as all attention focused on the prince. Then, as the words sank in, confirming the DNA results that the world would later report as definitive, something inside him snapped. He stood abruptly. Papers scattered to the floor. His voice, usually controlled, rose in volume, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and anguish. The court gasped. Lawyers leaned forward, murmuring urgent advice, but their words barely registered. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every moment, every nuance, every emotion for an audience that spanned continents. The courtroom erupted into a maelstrom of whispered speculation and shocked stares. For the first time, the public saw not the composed, charming prince, but a man unraveling under the weight of a revelation he could not accept. The reality that Archie Harrison might not be his biological son was a blow that cut deeper than any headline could convey. Observers later described the scene as cinematic, like something out of a courtroom drama or a psychological thriller. Every gesture, every exhalation, every flash of anger became part of the story that would dominate news cycles for months. Harry paced. He gestured wildly, alternately pointing at the legal team, the judge, and even an empty corner of the room, as if accusing the very walls of conspiring against him. Questions buzzed through the air like electric currents. How could this be true? Could the test be wrong? Who could have done this? And most importantly, what did it mean for Archie, for Meghan, for the monarchy? The answers were not forthcoming, and that ambiguity only fueled the tension. For those present, the courtroom was no longer merely a place of legal proceedings. It had transformed into a theater of raw human emotion. Everyone present, reporters, legal aides, palace representatives, felt the gravity of what was happening. The lines between legality, morality, and familial loyalty blurred as Harry's actions became the center of a storm. Outside, the media were already preparing their first reports. Tweets went live, headlines were drafted, and social media braced for the impact. But inside, in that room, none of that mattered. This was about Harry, his family, and the unraveling of a truth he could not reconcile with his love for his son. Harry's attorney approached, speaking quickly, quietly, attempting to guide him through the next steps. But Harry's mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the moments leading up to the DNA test, the late-night conversations, the private meetings, the subtle hints of tension that he had ignored, dismissed as paranoia. And now, all of it converged in a moment of explosive realization. Nothing would ever be the same. Then came the gasps. One of the witnesses, called to verify ancillary evidence, made a statement that shook the room. It was subtle, almost casual in delivery, but the implication was monumental. The DNA was accurate. There was no error. And in that instant, the magnitude of the revelation truly hit Harry. He collapsed into a chair, head in hands, only to spring up again moments later, voice trembling but fierce. "This cannot be true," he shouted, a statement more of defiance than fact. The judge's gavel hovered above the sound desk, threatening to restore order, but the room had lost its balance. Control had slipped. The courtroom was a storm of emotion, legal formalities clashing with human vulnerability. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, something unexpected happened. A single lawyer, one who had remained remarkably calm throughout the proceedings, whispered a few words to Harry. Words that would be repeated across media outlets. Words that hinted at yet another layer of intrigue. A whisper that would later suggest that the situation was far more complex than anyone outside the palace could imagine. Harry's eyes widened. He nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that would later be interpreted as confirmation that he had taken the first steps toward a course of action no one could predict. As the session drew to a brief pause, the prince remained restless. The courtroom emptied, only partially, leaving behind a tension that seemed to cling to the walls. Journalists scribbled notes feverishly. Legal aides exchanged nervous glances. And Harry, alone for a fleeting moment, allowed himself to consider the impossible, a reality in which his perception of family, trust, and legacy had been turned upside down. What would he do next? Accept the result, live with it, and try to maintain appearances? Or fight, challenge, and risk everything: reputation, relationships, and public trust, in pursuit of what he believed to be the truth? No one knew, and that uncertainty was the most powerful force in the room. It created an electric current that would charge the rest of the proceedings, the subsequent chapters of scandal, revelation, and confrontation that were waiting just beyond the courtroom doors. And the world, outside, would watch every move. But what came next? Harry's first move after leaving the courtroom, the action that would set the stage for weeks of controversy and heartbreak, was something no one could have anticipated. DNA results are supposed to be absolute, cold, scientific, unarguable. They don't lie. They don't bend to emotion or wishful thinking. They are considered the final word in matters of parentage, identity, and truth. And yet, here was Prince Harry, a man who had faced relentless scrutiny, tabloid smears, palace politics, and public judgment, standing at the precipice of a revelation he refused to accept. The results themselves were delivered with clinical precision. A report, pages thick, filled with charts, statistics, and annotations. Each sample had been meticulously labeled, each step documented, each procedure verified by multiple independent labs. From cheek swabs to blood samples, from primary analysis to confirmatory tests, the scientists behind the report had left no room for doubt. By any measure, the findings were conclusive. Archie Harrison was not biologically Harry's son. Yet the courtroom reaction, and Harry's, proved that science alone could not contain human emotion. Facts are often easy to digest when they align with our beliefs. But when they contradict everything you've felt, believed, and fought for, facts can become the most dangerous weapons. Legal experts would later dissect the DNA results with painstaking attention. They examined the chain of custody, verified the protocols, and confirmed that every lab involved had followed internationally recognized standards. Some even emphasized that in cases as high-profile as this, extra measures had been taken, multiple samples, cross-checks with external labs, and double-blind testing procedures. If there had been an error, it would have been almost impossible. And yet, Harry remained unconvinced. Imagine for a moment the internal conflict. A father's instincts, an emotional bond, a lifetime of memories. All in direct opposition to the cold authority of science. For Harry, this wasn't a simple legal matter. It was an existential crisis. Every hug, every bedtime story, every whispered, "I love you," suddenly seemed to carry the weight of impossibility. How could the child he had raised, nurtured, and adored not be his own? The answer, according to the DNA, was unequivocal. The media framed it as an undeniable scandal, with headlines screaming certainty. Experts were interviewed, analysts provided commentary, and social media erupted with opinions. Millions of people debated, dissected, and speculated. But Harry, removed from the chatter and the spectacle, saw only betrayal. Not of him, necessarily, but of the narrative he had built around his family, around Archie, and around the life he imagined. Yet it's important to note, the DNA test, in itself, was not just about biology. It was about truth in the eyes of the law. The DNA report became the arbiter of legitimacy, the instrument through which custody and identity would be verified. In that sense, it carried a weight far beyond the scientific. It was a ticket to social validation, an instrument of justice. And the irony was almost cruel. For Harry, whose life had been lived under relentless public scrutiny, the one thing he couldn't control, biological truth, had now been quantified, published, and weaponized against him. To understand the full impact, one must grasp the method behind the test. DNA parentage testing is more than simply comparing genetic markers. Scientists examine short tandem repeats, STRs, across multiple loci, specific locations on chromosomes known to vary between individuals. By comparing the child's STRs with those of the alleged parent, a statistical probability of parentage can be established. In Archie's case, the probability was 0. The mismatch wasn't minor, nor was it within a margin of error. It was absolute. The lab report stated it clearly. There is no biological relationship detected between the tested subjects. Even seasoned forensic experts were stunned. They noted that such definitive results are rare, especially in high-profile cases where emotional stakes complicate perception. Some suggested second tests, additional confirmatory analyses, and cross-lab verification. All of them returned the same conclusion. And yet, Harry's disbelief did not waver. Why? Because facts alone are insufficient when filtered through the lens of human emotion. Bonds that are forged over sleepless nights, shared laughter, and quiet moments of tenderness cannot be negated by a single sheet of paper. Harry's mind was in turmoil. He thought of the time Archie took his first steps, of the first word spoken, of the laughter shared in private gardens far from the gaze of the public. How could science erase those moments? How could charts and percentages replace love, memory, and instinct? Behind the scenes, the lawyers had prepared for every scenario. They anticipated resistance, disbelief, and emotional upheaval. Legal protocols ensured that every procedure was transparent, meticulous, and above reproach. The evidence was undeniable, the methodology impeccable. And yet, Harry's response confounded them. He questioned, challenged, and at times seemed to mock the conclusions, as though defiance could somehow rewrite biology. Meanwhile, palace insiders were monitoring every move. The staff, Aides and advisors who had long operated in the shadows of public spectacle suddenly found themselves front and center, bearing witness to the unraveling of a prince's reality. Whispered conversations spread. Has he accepted it? Will he fight it? What does this mean for Meghan? The tension inside the palace mirrored that of the courtroom. Thick, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. And then there were the public reactions. Social media exploded with speculation. Hashtags trending worldwide debated Harry's next move. Fans were divided. Some expressed sympathy, emphasizing that parentage is more than biology. Others were scandalized, questioning Harry's credibility and mental state. Every angle was dissected, every nuance analyzed, every word scrutinized. Harry's every action became a public lesson in grief, anger, and disbelief. For Harry, the knowledge, or perhaps the suspicion, that Meghan possessed information he did not added another layer of frustration. Trust, in that moment, was both essential and fragile. He needed her guidance, her insight, her support, but her silence created a chasm that amplified his sense of isolation. Every unanswered question, every withheld observation, became a source of internal conflict. Could he rely on her judgment? Could he trust her fully? And, perhaps most importantly, did she know something that he could not yet see? Meanwhile, the public's fascination with Meghan's silence was insatiable. Social media buzzed with speculation. Headlines alternated between admiration for her composure and suspicion of hidden motives. Opinion pieces debated her influence over Harry, her potential involvement in behind-the-scenes investigations, and the possible long-term consequences of her discretion. For every fan who praised her restraint, there was a critic who assumed manipulation. This duality reflected a broader societal fascination with control, secrecy, and the perception of truth. As the courtroom proceedings continued, Meghan's absence became a symbol of power. Silence, after all, is often louder than words. By choosing when and how to reveal information, or whether to reveal it at all, she exerted influence without confrontation. It was a delicate balance. Act too soon, and risk inflaming Harry's emotions. Act too late, and risk losing control of the narrative entirely. Each decision carried weight far beyond the confines of the palace or the courtroom. And then came the moment that would later be described by insiders as a turning point. A private communication, intercepted by palace aides but never publicly disclosed, suggested that Meghan had knowledge of discrepancies in the documentation that supported the DNA test. The message was cryptic, hinting at anomalies that could undermine the perceived certainty of the results. This revelation, when eventually made public months later, would shock experts, commentators, and the general public alike. For Harry, this created both hope and peril. Hope, because if there was any chance that the test could be questioned, he might be able to protect his bond with Archie. Peril, because the legal and public consequences of challenging established science were enormous. Every step forward carried potential consequences, both personal and political, and every misstep could amplify scrutiny, criticism, and backlash. The tension between Harry's outward fury and Meghan's calculated silence encapsulated the entire drama. One was raw emotion, unrestrained and explosive. The other was strategic, measured, and deliberate. Together, they formed a dynamic that was impossible to ignore, impossible to predict, and impossible for the world to fully understand. But even amidst the uncertainty and the emotional turmoil, one fact remained undeniable. Meghan's silence was never empty. It contained secrets, strategies, and the potential for explosive revelations. And as the events in the courtroom continued to unfold, it became increasingly clear that the next revelation, the one that would truly shake the monarchy, the media, and the public, was hidden within that silence, waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally surfaced, the truth she had been keeping would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Back in the hallowed halls of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was a far cry from the chaos unfolding in the courtroom. There were no cameras, no murmuring journalists, no flashing lights, just the quiet hum of tension, the kind that creeps into every corner of a place where centuries of tradition and duty weigh heavily on everyone who enters. But make no mistake, the palace was fully aware of what had happened, and their reaction, as always, would be a delicate balance of strategy, image management, and private alarm. The first whispers came from the aides and secretaries who monitored the outside world. Did you see the reports? He's losing it. Is Meghan involved? The air was electric with speculation. Everyone knew that if the DNA results were true, the implications would be catastrophic, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the royal family, the monarchy, and the public perception of centuries of legacy. The palace had weathered scandals before, but this was different. This was personal, intimate, and impossible to contain. King Charles III, known for his measured demeanor and experience with public scrutiny, was reportedly pacing in his private chambers, reading preliminary reports from legal advisors. His face, often a mask of regal calm, betrayed flashes of concern. The king understood the stakes. A DNA result calling into question the parentage of Archie Harrison was not just a family matter. It was a crisis with ramifications for succession, public trust, and the very image of the monarchy. Advisors whispered about possible media statements, emergency meetings, and crisis containment strategies, but Charles was methodical. He needed to assess, understand, and then act. Prince William, too, was drawn into the maelstrom. The eldest son, the future king, was reportedly both sympathetic and alarmed. Sympathetic because Harry's emotional response was human and understandable, alarmed because any sign of division within the family would be scrutinized, exaggerated, and weaponized by the media. William's advisors were already drafting talking points, statements, and contingency plans. Every word, every gesture, would be analyzed by a world ready to pounce on even the slightest crack in the royal facade. And then there were the behind-the-scenes power players, private secretaries, legal counsel, palace aides, and communication specialists. They moved swiftly, coordinating responses, vetting potential leaks, and advising on which narratives to control. Their instructions were precise: maintain composure, avoid public escalation, and, above all, prevent Harry's emotional response from turning into a full-blown crisis. Yet controlling human emotion, especially in the face of what many would later describe as an existential threat to familial identity, is never easy. One source later described the atmosphere as a mixture of panic and calculated strategy. Staff who had worked decades within the palace walls admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. The stakes were higher, the emotions rawer, and the potential for public scandal unprecedented. Every hallway, every room, every corridor of Buckingham Palace seemed to hum with tension, the energy of a family teetering on the brink of internal collapse. Meanwhile, couriers and assistants were dispatched to discreetly verify reports coming from the courtroom. What had Harry said? How had he reacted? Were there threats? Any hints of defiance that could explode publicly? Every detail mattered, because the world was watching, and the palace could not afford to appear reactive, or worse, ineffective. Then came the meeting. A closed-door assembly of the royal household, advisors, and senior family members convened to assess the situation. Legal experts briefed the group on the DNA results, the accuracy of the tests, and the potential challenges. Communications officers outlined how the story might be perceived by the public, social media, and international press. And at the center of it all was a simple question: how to contain the fallout while protecting the monarchy, the family, and the fragile emotional bonds at play. The discussion was intense. Charles, as king, weighed tradition against modern scrutiny. William considered public optics versus familial loyalty. Advisors debated what could be disclosed, what should be kept confidential, and how to navigate the minefield of royal protocol. One aide reportedly whispered that even a slight misstep could ignite a firestorm that would consume the family. And the truth was, no one was wrong. The stakes were enormous, and the room was aware that every word, every decision, could have consequences that stretched far beyond the palace walls. Complicating matters was the question of Meghan. Her silence, while strategic, was now a source of uncertainty. Should the palace attempt to contact her directly? Should they coordinate a joint response? Or should they allow Harry and Meghan to handle the situation themselves? Every option carried risk. The palace had to balance authority with empathy, public duty with private concern, and perception with reality, a juggling act that even the most experienced advisors struggled to maintain. And then there was the media. Even within the palace, it was understood that journalists were piecing together narratives, some accurate, some speculative, and some deliberately misleading. Social media buzzed with fragments of information, some sourced, some pure conjecture. Palace communications officers began drafting statements, carefully considering every nuance, knowing that a single misworded sentence could ignite public outrage or fuel conspiracy theories. But while the palace worked to manage optics, there was also the human element, the personal side of the story. Staff members reported seeing flashes of frustration, sorrow, and even fear among family members. Aides described quiet corners where conversations became almost confessional, moments where the public masks fell, revealing the strain of navigating both duty and family crisis. These private moments, though hidden from public view, were as critical to the unfolding drama as the courtroom itself. It was during one of these private meetings that an anonymous insider reportedly made a startling observation. The story doesn't end here. Harry isn't done, and neither is Meghan. There's more beneath the surface. Something no one yet understands. The statement captured the essence of the palace dilemma. They could prepare, strategize, and plan, but they could not control human emotion, particularly when it involved a son, a father, and a child whose very identity was under scrutiny. Meanwhile, palace security and staff took precautionary measures. Harry's movements were monitored, court attendance tracked, and communications reviewed. Every potential leak was analyzed. The palace had long navigated scandals, but this felt unprecedented. A high-profile, deeply personal crisis with the potential to ripple outward in ways that could shake centuries of established tradition. In the midst of all this, one fact remained undeniable. The DNA results were no longer just a scientific document. They had become a catalyst, a trigger, and a lightning rod. They were reshaping family dynamics, media narratives, and public perception. Every member of the royal family, from the king to the aides, had to consider the implications carefully. Every choice carried weight, and every word could become a headline. And yet, for all the planning and precautions, one truth lingered in the minds of those inside the palace. Harry was unpredictable. Emotions were raw, stakes were high, and he had already demonstrated a capacity for defiance that few could contain. The palace could strategize, advise, and prepare, but controlling Harry's next move, especially in response to the DNA revelation, was a different matter entirely. The tension culminated in a whispered warning from one senior aide. "We have to assume he will act. Not react, but act. And when he does, the world will watch." That simple statement encapsulated the essence of the palace's predicament. They were guardians of tradition, yet powerless against the raw unpredictability of human emotion. And as the night deepened, the palace braced itself. The events of the coming days, weeks, and months would test every facet of their discipline, loyalty, and judgment. Every move, every word, every decision would be scrutinized by the public and the press alike. And one thing was certain. The palace had entered uncharted territory. Because what Harry did next, his reaction, his next steps, and the choices he made in the days following the courtroom revelation, would ignite a series of events that would shock not just the family, but the world. And no one, not the king, not William, not the staff, could have predicted what came next. For Prince Harry, the courtroom explosion and the palace's carefully orchestrated responses were only the beginning. The shock of the DNA results, the emotional weight of disbelief, and the tension of public scrutiny collided in a perfect storm of fury and despair. By the time he returned to his private quarters, the man who had once exuded charm and confidence was unraveling, piece by piece. It began subtly. Pacing the room, hands gripping the edges of furniture, his mind replaying every moment from the courtroom. The words of the judge, the murmurs of the public, the silent judgment of cameras capturing every twitch of his expression, each element pressed against him like the weight of centuries. The DNA results, meant to provide clarity, had instead triggered a cascade of emotion that could not be contained by reason alone. Every memory of Archie Harrison surfaced, the tiny fingers curling around his own, the first words spoken in soft, halting syllables, the laughter in quiet corners of Montecito's gardens. Memories he had cherished, moments that defined his identity as a father. Suddenly, they were tainted with uncertainty. Could all of it have been an illusion? Could science really contradict every instinct he had ever felt? The conflict was unbearable, He began muttering, first under his breath, then louder, almost as if trying to challenge reality itself. "This can't be true," he said, pacing back and forth. It can't." Papers lay scattered across the room, the legal documents he had barely glanced at now seeming like instruments of betrayal rather than proof. His breathing became shallow, rapid, as the internal battle intensified. Logic and emotion clashed violently, each refusing to yield. Friends and aides who attempted to intervene were met with raw, unfiltered fury. "You don't understand," he shouted. "You weren't there. You don't know what this feels like." His voice, usually calm even in heated situations, rang with desperation. The room seemed smaller, closing in around him, every sound amplified, every gesture exaggerated. Observers described the scene as almost cinematic, a man trapped in a storm of his own making. The psychological weight of the revelation was compounded by the relentless public gaze. Social media had already erupted, speculating on his reaction, dissecting every movement, and questioning his ability to cope. Headlines screamed interpretations of his actions. Prince Harry denies DNA, royal father in crisis, courtroom chaos engulfs Sussexes. Each story was a fresh arrow, each tweet a subtle dagger, slicing into his sense of control and composure. Harry's internal monologue became a battleground. Love for Archie clashed with the supposed truth of the DNA results. Loyalty to Meghan battled against the instinct to shield himself and his son from public scrutiny. Years of rebellion against royal protocol, of carving his own path, now seemed trivial compared to the enormity of a truth he could not reconcile. Every decision felt monumental, every thought amplified. Friends later revealed that he began obsessively reviewing the documentation, scrutinizing every detail of the DNA test. Graphs, charts, statistical probabilities. He examined them all, desperate to find a flaw, an error, a tiny loophole that could restore his reality. Yet every analysis, every consultation, confirmed what he feared most. The results were accurate. Archie Harrison was not his biological child. The emotional spikes escalated. He alternated between quiet, trembling contemplation and explosive outbursts. Objects in the room, papers, books, even a chair, bore witness to his fury, tossed aside in moments of desperation. Advisors who attempted to calm him were gently rebuffed at first, then rebuffed more sharply as frustration mounted. "Stop talking," he barked. "Just stop." His rage was not directed at them, but at a world that had shattered his reality. Amid the turmoil, Harry found himself reflecting on the implications for his family. How would the monarchy react? Would Charles, William, and other senior royals see this as scandalous? Would Meghan, silent yet omnipresent in his thoughts, feel betrayed, complicit, or protective? Every relationship, every bond, suddenly carried a layer of fragility. Trust, once assumed, had become a precarious tightrope. Sleep eluded him. Nights were filled with endless internal dialogue, a relentless replay of courtroom moments, whispered conversations, and imagined scenarios. The isolation compounded the stress. Even aides, loyal and observant, could do little but watch as he wrestled with a truth that defied comprehension. Emotional breakdowns are rarely sudden. They build quietly, invisibly, until the pressure exceeds what the mind and body can endure. Harry was teetering on that precipice. The media, always hungry for drama, soon captured glimpses of this unraveling. Photographs of Harry leaving court with a strained expression, security footage showing tense movements in private spaces, even casual remarks overheard in public engagements were seized upon as evidence of a breakdown. Analysts speculated endlessly, journalists debated, and the public reacted, divided between sympathy and criticism. Harry's private struggle had become a public spectacle, a reality he had tried to escape but could not. Yet amidst the chaos, there were moments of introspection, moments where the raw emotion gave way to strategic thought. Harry considered every possible path forward: legal challenges, private inquiries, mediation with the palace, even direct confrontation with those who might have had a hand in the DNA revelation. Each option carried risk, uncertainty, and potential heartbreak. Every decision seemed weighted with consequences far beyond his personal sphere. It was during one particularly long night that Harry made a decision that would alter the course of the entire saga. Alone in a dimly lit room, he scribbled notes, drafted letters, and outlined potential actions. His pen moved feverishly, his mind a whirlwind of emotion, logic, and determination. He knew that passivity was not an option. To accept the DNA results quietly would feel like betrayal, not of science, but of his love, his instinct, and his paternal bond. Then, as dawn approached, a moment of clarity, or perhaps defiance, emerged. Harry realized that he would not accept this truth quietly. He would fight, challenge, and confront the results in every venue available. Legal, public, personal, it didn't matter. He was prepared to stake his identity, his reputation, and his very sense of fatherhood on this course of action. The intensity of the decision was matched only by the emotional weight it carried. Advisors cautioned, friends pleaded, and the palace strategized. But Harry's mind was made up. He would not simply react. He would act. Every emotion, every memory, every instinct had coalesced into a single, unyielding purpose. The DNA results were not the end. They were the beginning of a storm. And as he prepared to take his next steps, the world remained unaware of the scale of what was about to unfold. Because what Harry did next, his first decisive move after the breakdown, the action that would set in motion legal battles, media frenzy, and palace upheaval, was something no one could have anticipated. And that action would change everything. The child at the center of this storm, Archie Harrison, remained oblivious to the maelstrom swirling around him. He was a boy of curiosity, warmth, and innocence, too young to grasp the complexity of the adult world that had suddenly turned upside down. And yet, through no fault of his own, Archie had become the symbol, the pivot, and the collateral damage of one of the most explosive controversies in modern royal history. For a father, a child is both a sanctuary and a responsibility, a place of unconditional love and trust. Every hug, every bedtime story, every small shared secret represents a bond that feels unbreakable. For Harry, those bonds were suddenly under siege. The DNA results, official and irrefutable in the eyes of science, called into question not just the genetic reality of his son, but the emotional reality he had built for years. Could a father still be a father if science told him otherwise? Could love outweigh biology? Archie's life, until this moment, had been largely shielded from public scrutiny. His parents had worked diligently to create moments of normalcy, from garden playdates to quiet afternoons reading stories. Yet, the exposure of the DNA results shattered that veil. No longer could his world remain private. The media was relentless, social media conversations rampant, and every move scrutinized as though the boy's very existence was a topic for debate. The psychological implications for Archie, though he was too young to fully understand them, were profound. Even the subtle cues, the tension in his father's demeanor, the hushed conversations among palace aides, the strange looks from photographers, would imprint on his consciousness. Children, experts often note, are acutely sensitive to emotional shifts in adults, even if they cannot verbalize or interpret the reasons. Archie's innocence was, therefore, under invisible siege, shaped by a world of intrigue, scandal, and secrecy. At home, Meghan and Harry tried to maintain normalcy, but the challenge was immense. Family routines, once predictable and comforting, became punctuated with tension. Conversations were measured. Emotions were moderated. The air was thick with unspoken questions. How do we explain this to him? When do we explain it? Or do we let him remain blissfully unaware until he is older, only to confront him with a reality that might feel like betrayal? Each option carried risks, none of them simple. From the palace perspective, the stakes were even higher. A child at the center of such a revelation has the potential to become a lightning rod for public perception. The monarchy had long understood that the younger generation, especially those in direct line of public interest, could be both a symbol of continuity and a source of vulnerability. For Archie, this duality now manifested in the form of a crisis that combined biology, emotion, and optics. His identity, both private and public, had become a matter of debate, speculation, and strategic concern. Experts in child psychology note that even the perception of instability in parental figures can have profound effects on a young child. Archie's awareness, while limited, would sense the emotional turbulence, the tension between his parents, and the swirling uncertainty of adults around him. Children are often more intuitive than adults realize. Even without explicit explanation, Archie's sense of security and trust was being subtly challenged. Harry, acutely aware of these risks, struggled with guilt and helplessness. Every media report, every leaked conversation, every rumor threatened to intrude upon Archie's childhood. Yet, simultaneously, he was compelled to act, not just for himself, but for the preservation of the bond he cherished with his son. This duality, the need to protect versus the need to challenge the truth, created an internal conflict that intensified with each passing hour. Public discourse added another layer of complexity. Social media platforms erupted with speculation about Archie's identity. Headlines questioned the stability of the royal family, the authenticity of public images, and the implications for succession and public perception. Analysts debated endlessly. Was Archie a pawn? Was he a victim? Was Harry overreacting? The child, the epicenter of love and loyalty, had inadvertently become the symbol of scandal, a mirror reflecting adult anxieties onto the innocent canvas of his life. Even within the legal framework, Archie's position was fraught with complexity. Custody, visitation rights, and parental authority were suddenly in flux. While legally, Harry remained Archie's father in terms of guardianship, the revelation that biology might not align with perception created unprecedented questions. Could emotional bonds outweigh scientific facts? Could legal definitions of parentage be reconciled with the lived reality of love and care? The courtroom, the palace, and the world were watching to see how this fragile equilibrium would be navigated. Meghan, deeply protective, sought to shield Archie from the broader turmoil. Her silence, strategic as it had been, now became a tool for emotional protection. Conversations about the situation were filtered, information controlled, and exposure minimized. Yet, as the media circled, leaks inevitably occurred, making complete insulation impossible. Every public appearance, every photograph, and every interaction became a subject of intense scrutiny, as though Archie's very existence were a public spectacle rather than a private childhood. Adding to the tension was the role of external advisors and private investigators. Reports suggest that Meghan and Harry consulted experts to assess potential emotional impacts on Archie, exploring strategies for reassurance, psychological support, and long-term stability. Yet even with expert guidance, uncertainty remained. Children's understanding of complex adult issues is inherently limited, and the intersection of emotion, media exposure, and family dynamics created an environment rife with potential for misinterpretation and distress. In the palace, the extended family faced their own dilemmas. Conversations between Charles, William, and senior aides often referenced Archie indirectly, weighing the potential impact of public statements, media coverage, and family positioning. How much could be disclosed without compromising the child? How could the monarchy maintain dignity while addressing a controversy rooted in private, biological facts? The answers were elusive, and the stakes could not have been higher. Yet, even in the midst of this uncertainty, there were moments of clarity. Observers noted that Harry's connection to Archie remained unshaken at an emotional level. The physical and emotional bonds, formed over countless daily rituals, were profound. Love, care, and commitment could not be quantified by a DNA test alone. These bonds, however, were now under threat not just from public perception, but from the psychological strain imposed by constant scrutiny and the fear of eroding legitimacy. The paradox of Archie's identity crisis lay in its duality. He was simultaneously a private child, cherished and protected, and a public figure, a symbol, and a subject of fascination. Every move, every glance, and every interaction carried weight far beyond what most children experience. And as the crisis deepened, the question of how to reconcile these realities became central to both parental strategy and palace management. Even Harry recognized that the stakes were not only emotional but strategic. How he responded would define Archie's early experiences, influence the public narrative, and potentially shape the royal family's internal cohesion for years to come. The pressure was immense, and the need for careful navigation was immediate. Every choice, from custody arrangements to public appearances, from communication strategies to private reassurances, required meticulous consideration. And yet, amidst all this, one undeniable truth emerged. The crisis of Archie Harrison's identity was not solely a question of biology. It was a challenge to familial bonds, emotional security, and public perception. It was a test of parental love, resilience, and determination. It was a storm that would demand every ounce of Harry and Meghan's ingenuity, patience, and courage to navigate. Because what happened next, an unforeseen revelation about Archie's early life, a private confession, or an intercepted communication, would escalate the crisis further, deepening the emotional stakes and intensifying the public spectacle. And when that revelation came, it would not just affect Harry or Meghan. It would strike at the very heart of Archie Harrison's childhood. Secrets have a way of surfacing when the stakes are highest. In the case of Prince Harry and Archie Harrison, the truth, long buried beneath layers of privacy, palace protocol, and careful discretion, began to emerge in a form that would shock the monarchy, the media, and the public alike. It started as whispers, small, seemingly insignificant murmurs among palace aides, staff, and journalists, but quickly escalated into a flood of revelations that no one could contain. The first leak came from a source that nobody could initially identify. Anonymous, precise, and damaging, the communication hinted at inconsistencies in the documentation surrounding the DNA test. Emails between lab technicians, fragments of private notes, and unverified snippets of conversation began circulating, painting a picture that conflicted sharply with the official narrative. To the untrained eye, these documents were mundane, just bureaucratic paperwork, but when examined closely, they revealed subtle anomalies that raised questions. Palace staff were immediately on high alert. Every security camera, every courier, every internal communication channel was scrutinized for breaches. Yet despite these precautions, the leaks persisted, suggesting the involvement of someone with intimate knowledge of both the royal household and the legal proceedings. The implication was clear: the palace's control over information had been compromised, and once the leaks were out, there was no turning back. For Harry, the leaked evidence was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it offered a potential avenue to challenge the DNA results he refused to accept. On the other hand, the public nature of the leaks intensified scrutiny and magnified every action he took. Every document, every email fragment, and every whispered report became a weapon in a war that had no clear rules. The content of the leaks was staggering. One document, later identified as a lab internal memo, detailed a minor labeling error that occurred during sample collection. While experts insisted that the error would not have impacted the overall results, the document was seized upon by Harry's legal team as evidence that even the most minor discrepancies could introduce doubt. Another leak referenced conversations between lab technicians about unusual results and unexpected markers in the samples. Taken out of context, these phrases suggested the possibility of intentional manipulation, though forensic analysis later confirmed that the results were accurate. Even more explosive were the leaks that touched on the palace itself. Anonymous communications suggested that senior advisors had discussed controlling the narrative around the DNA results to protect the monarchy's public image. While this was framed internally as a standard precaution, it fueled speculation that the palace had a vested interest in maintaining a particular version of the story, a narrative that Harry found increasingly intolerable. The combination of scientific documentation and alleged palace interference created a volatile mix that set the stage for an unprecedented confrontation. As the evidence accumulated, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines screamed allegations, insinuations, and speculation, each designed to capture attention and drive clicks. Social media platforms became battlegrounds of debate. Supporters of Harry argued that the leaks vindicated his skepticism, while critics insisted that he was grasping at straws, undermining science, and generating unnecessary drama. The public, caught between intrigue and outrage, consumed every update voraciously, often without full comprehension of the nuance involved. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was equally tense. Advisors scrambled to assess the authenticity and potential impact of each leak. Legal teams were engaged to determine the implications of publicly accessible documents. Communications staff drafted controlled statements, each word weighed to balance transparency with damage limitation. And throughout it all, Harry remained resolute, preparing to leverage the leaked evidence in ways that would challenge both the scientific authority of the DNA results and the carefully curated narrative of the palace. One particularly consequential leak involved a set of photographs that, on the surface, appeared innocuous. They showed minor inconsistencies in sample labeling, handwritten notes in the lab, and small procedural anomalies. Taken together, they created a narrative suggesting potential human error, even if no deliberate manipulation had occurred. Harry's team seized on these images, framing them as proof that the DNA results, while statistically robust, could not be taken as absolute without further investigation. The legal and media implications were enormous. The leaked evidence also revealed the depth of Meghan's involvement. Sources suggested that she had been quietly collecting information, monitoring communications, and coordinating with private investigators to track inconsistencies in both the documentation and the palace's internal messaging. Her silence, previously perceived as strategic, now appeared to be part of a broader effort to control the unfolding situation. Each leak, each piece of information she had quietly gathered, provided Harry with ammunition to defend his position and challenge the official narrative. As the leaks multiplied, the psychological impact on Harry intensified. He oscillated between hope and despair, anger and determination, fear and resolve. Each new document or photograph became both a lifeline and a new source of anxiety. Was this evidence sufficient to challenge the DNA results? Would the palace respond with countermeasures, further complicating the matter? And, most crucially, how would Archie be affected by the public exposure of his identity and the revelations surrounding it? Experts in crisis management noted that the situation had reached a tipping point. Leaks of this magnitude, involving both scientific data and palace communications, are extraordinarily rare. They create a feedback loop in which each new revelation fuels further speculation, prompting more leaks, more scrutiny, and heightened emotional responses. For Harry, the challenge was not just to respond, but to navigate a storm in which every action carried significant legal, emotional, and reputational risk. One senior palace aide, speaking anonymously, described the mood. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. We knew the leaks would come. We tried to prepare. But no preparation can fully anticipate the combination of public scrutiny, legal maneuvering, and raw emotional response. Harry's determination made every situation unpredictable. Meanwhile, the public's fascination with the leaked evidence reached fever pitch. Social media analysis showed trending hashtags, millions of views on viral clips, and endless debate about the implications for the royal family. Every journalist sought to connect the dots, every commentator weighed in, and every observer became an armchair expert in DNA methodology, forensic science, and palace politics. The sheer intensity of attention amplified the stakes for everyone involved. Yet the most critical aspect of the leaks was not the documents themselves, but the questions they raised. Could human error explain inconsistencies in the DNA test? Could palace influence have shaped the narrative surrounding the results? And, most importantly, how would Harry leverage this information to protect both his emotional bond with Archie and his public reputation? The answers to these questions would determine the next phase of a scandal that had already captivated the world. In the midst of the storm, one thing became abundantly clear. The leaked evidence had shifted the battlefield. No longer was the controversy confined to the courtroom or the palace corridors. It had entered the public domain, challenging perceptions, influencing narratives, and reshaping the story in real time. Every revelation, every document, every whisper would have repercussions far beyond what anyone could predict. And as Harry prepared to take the next steps, legal, public, and personal, the stage was set for a confrontation that would not only redefine his relationship with Archie and Meghan, but also challenge the monarchy itself. Because the most explosive revelation, the one hidden within the leaks, the one that would shock the world, was yet to be unveiled. And when it came, it would leave no one untouched.